on twice a day, a different time each day? I don't know.
They got several, there's a schedule. When you go there, you can see the schedule. They got several, sermons and different churches, and he's doing lots of creative things with that. Yep, live. We're ready to go.
All right, welcome once again to our study in the Gospel of Luke. Unfortunately, we were in the midst of an event in the life of Jesus the last time, so we'll be picking that up in Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, and I think that we had finished verse 7 last time, but let's read the verses leading up to that to get our context here, get the flow. So begin with verse 1. Would someone like to read verses 1 through 7 for us?
Now, when he had ended all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered into Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear unto him, was sick and ready to die. And when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him earnestly, saying that he was worthy for whom he should do this. For he loveth our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was now not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying unto him, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that thou shouldest enter under my roof.
Verse 7 also.
Wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee, but say in a word, and my servant shall be healed.
All right, so the situation is that there is this centurion, a Roman soldier. We liken him to a sergeant in our army who has control over a group of men, has risen to that place of leadership through his own bravery. And so he is a significant man in the Roman army, but also has proved to be significant among the Jewish people of Capernaum, for he has built them a synagogue out of his own funds. And he has a slave who is very sick. And so he sends a delegation of the Jewish elders of the city to plead on his behalf with Jesus, having heard about all the things that Jesus had accomplished, to plead with him to save his slave. But then they, having arrived and communicated that message to Jesus, the centurion sends another group of his friends saying, on second thought, I'm not even worthy for you to come, but just say a word, logos, and you can heal him. So one of the messages we see from that very last part is that this man trusts that Jesus doesn't have to be present in order to perform a miracle. And so that plays into the message we said last time that Luke wishes to convey, that salvation that comes from Jesus also does not require his presence. And then verse 8, we have the explanation that is given by the centurion as to why he has this confidence. He says there, for I also am a man placed under authority with soldiers under me. Vincent suggests in his word studies that taking the Greek words in their order, they may read this way: for I also, a man, as compared with you, am set under authority, having soldiers under myself. And he illustrates it by saying, I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. I think in this regard, he's talking about his soldiers. He tells the soldiers to come and go, and they do what he says. They're under his command. And then he switches over, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. And so in the daily course of life and duty, this man knows what it means to have authority over other people, and that they must obey what he says. He understands that authority. And he also knew that a commander did not need to be present in order for the instructions to be carried out. He only needs to say the word. So this man not only viewed Jesus as having authority over sickness, But he even believed that Jesus' spoken word would be sufficient to heal. The centurion in this regard understood what even Jesus' close friends, Mary and Martha, did not in John 1 or John 11. Following the death of their brother Lazarus, each of them lamented the fact that Jesus had not been what? Present, had not been there prior to the death of their loved one, as if he might have done something that he could not do now. The centurion understood that Jesus had so much authority that it was not necessary for him to be physically present to perform a miracle. He could just say so, and it would be done. Could the Son of God, even if understood as a prophet, do no less than Elisha, the prophet, had done in that same vicinity? Through Elisha, God had healed at a distance a heathen military commander. Remember that? Who was struck with leprosy? Would not God, through Jesus, heal at a distance another heathen military commander's slave? He believes so. Pastor David Guzik comments that he says the centurion was a remarkable man. The elders said he was worthy. He said he was not worthy. They praised him for building a house of worship. He felt unworthy that Jesus would come into his house. They said he was deserving. He felt himself undeserving. And then he concludes with this statement: strong faith and great humility are entirely compatible. And I would say necessarily so. Strong faith and great humility. You don't find one without the other, in my estimation. All right, so next we come to the centurion's faith. Oh, let me I pause for any questions or comments up through verse 8.
I just was confused. How is it that he was aware of the fact? Is his whole knowing of Jesus was hearing what he had done and how he had healed people physically and in their presence? How is it that he reached a point of saying, I know you can do this even if you're not in my house? I may have missed what you, how you guys.
Well, the only explanation I can come up with is that by the grace of God, he had that understanding. I don't know that there's anything that's been communicated that would have given him that understanding. I don't think there was anyone in his village that could have given him that understanding. It's purely by revelation from God himself that he understood that what he heard had a further application, that if this man could do what he did in presence of other people, that he could do it in absence from them as well. That'd be my explanation. John?
That's an interesting question, because you can extrapolate that out, which make it bigger, and say, how did any of us know the Christ? You know, it's not by anything we've done, it's because of the revelation of God that he's the Son of God. Because of,
Yeah, just to be clear, there are times when we can point to certain people that have said something to us or influences that we've had, but sometimes we come to an understanding that simply is something primarily from God's word that he impresses upon us. And in this case, we're not sure, but it certainly seemed to be God himself working in this man.
It reminds me of the woman that had the blood issue.
Mhm.
Just wanted to touch his,
Yeah, she had no one ever told her that would work, but apparently God had impressed upon her to do that. Yeah, good illustration. All right, good. That was a good question. Any others? All right, let's go to verse 9. Now, when Jesus heard this, just pause there for a moment. Just think about that. When Jesus heard what the centurion had said, he marveled at him. Any other translations of that word, marveled? Amazed. Now, there's only one other time in all the Gospels that Jesus marveled. I dare say you won't come up with it unless you're
unbelief.
at unbelief. Wow, Joe got it. At the unbelief in Nazareth in Matthew chapter 6, he marveled at their unbelief. Here he's marveling at belief, at faith. And then this struck me, and I'm not sure what to say about it, but he marveled at what the centurion had said, and he turned. So I'm trying to picture in my mind as Jesus meets this delegation of friends from the centurion, and here's what they have to say. And all the people that are following him are behind him. And so he turns to them, to the crowd that was following him. And look at what he says. I say to you, and whenever Jesus or anybody starts out that way, I say to you, something important's happening. I don't know whether you ever said that kind of thing to your kids or your teacher to students. Let me tell you something. I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. It is obvious that faith, not natural or national origin or privileged standing, is the key to the new age inaugurated by Jesus. Jesus values faith above ethnic grouping, class grouping, or even religious grouping. And that's part of the message of Luke to these Gentiles to whom he's writing, and which will carry on in the book of Acts. So there are three opinions that have been given concerning this Gentile Roman centurion. First of all, the Jewish elders' opinion. The apostrophes in the wrong place there. Should have been after the S. I will blame the person from whom I copied it. And that is, he's worthy. He's deserving. He loves our nation. He built us a synagogue. This guy is worthy of anything you can do. And then we have his opinion of himself. I'm not worthy. I'm not sufficient that you should even enter under my roof. And then there's Jesus' opinion of him, that he was a man of remarkable faith. John Bunyan pointed out, a Roman soldier was the first fruit of the Gentile world. Any comments about these opinions concerning the centurion? I think we can dive deeper into Jesus' opinion and see three ways the centurion amazed Jesus. What was it that brought amazement to Jesus? First of all, he humbled himself, knowing anything God did was an undeserved gift. And we've said that over and over again, that one must be humbled before the Lord when you come to him. You can't come to him bragging, what a great gift I am to you, God. That's not the way it happens. If you understand grace, you understand salvation. And this humility was something that amazed Jesus. Secondly, this man focused on the needs of others, particularly his servant, his slave. And isn't that the way of humility also? That if we're humble, we see opportunities to serve others. And then thirdly, he believed Jesus could do whatever he said he would do. Those are the aspects of what amazed Jesus. All right, any comments about these particular items?
Can you repeat that second one?
Can you see it?
I can see it because you brought me.
Oh, sorry. Can you see it there?
Focus on the needs of others.
All right, let's go to verse 9. I'm sorry, verse 10. We were in verse 9. And this is the slave healed. Well, wait a moment for Leonard to finish writing.
What's that third one say?
Believed Jesus could do whatever he said he would do. I tried many different colors to see what would show up with this background, and I can see them fine from here. I don't know about where you are. What? Yellow was best. I tried it and it didn't work as well over there for some reason. So,
It's just amazing the faith of this man.
yeah,
He wasn't a follower. I mean, he wasn't the close group, but those are the closest group didn't have that kind of faith.
yeah, exactly. And again, it has to go back to God's revealing of himself, the grace of God. Yeah, John.
It reminds me of discussions I've had with people over the years that usually you get to the point where someone will say, I deserve this or I deserve that. And
Oh, you hear it on TV all the time.
Yeah.
Get this, because you deserve it. You deserve better Medicare coverage. You deserve, yeah, go ahead.
And that leads into a discussion because you can always say, you definitely don't want what you deserve.
Yeah.
And then you can tell them why.
I started to respond with a statement that my friend Mark Bell, who is pastor at Cornerstone Presbyterian, uses when someone says, how are you? He says, better than I deserve.
Right.
And it always gets a reaction. I need to remember to do that all the time because it's a chance to talk about God's grace. Okay, let's go to verse 10. The slave healed. When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health, which seems to be a medical term. Surprise. Dr. Darrell Bach, Dallas Theological Seminary, points out that this healing, and this is where I got the idea to go back to and look at the title of this as not simply a servant healed, but rather the amazing Mr. Centurion. He says it's less a miracle story and more a character study. The centurion's faith evidenced itself in his humility, which had allowed others to honor him as a worthy man. But this worthiness melted back into its source of humility as he faced the Son of God. He understood that God owed him nothing. He did not even feel worthy of being visited by God's agent. Yet he also understood God's authority to heal and his compassion. However, addressing the miracle, Dr. Bach says, the major topic of the healing is faith in light of Jesus' authority. Jesus spoke about this authority back in chapter 6, verses 20 to 49. Just glance back there, just to remind ourselves of what Jesus was saying here in the Sermon on the Plain, or the Plain Sermon. You know, starting out with Beatitudes and moving to woes, and then Jesus gives guidelines for Christian living. You know, someone hits you in the cheek, whoever asks of you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that? You know, and so on. Lending, loving your enemies, doing good. Don't judge, don't condemn. Give, will be given to you. Talking about leadership, not being blind men, guiding blind. A pupil not being above his teacher. Again, trying to evidence the love as these disciples of his make further disciples, and taking the speck out of your brother's eye. The good tree produces good fruit, a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good man out of the good treasure, verse 45, his heart brings forth what is good. The evil man out of the evil treasure, that which is evil. And then it goes into the illustration of the men building the two houses. So with that as the background, then Jesus demonstrates in this and in the following passage what he was talking about. But a second theme of Luke also emerges, and that is, and it's an underlying, this is not a major point, but it's something that certainly would have an impact upon his hearers, and that is that Jews and Gentiles can get along and respect one another. That's not the norm, but it can happen. And so he addresses that here as well. All right, any final comments or questions about the centurion?
God had something positive for people that serve in the armed forces at that time and even today, that the first recorded salvation was another centurion And that was in Acts chapter 10, his name was Cornelius.
Uh-huh.
And seems like God went out of his way to deliver the message through an angel because an angel, at least to go get Peter, because
Right.
an angel can't tell at this point in time the whole fact about salvation.
Mhm.
So he gave him information to go get Peter.
Right.
So he was a centurion too, which is
Right.
a captain, of about 50 to 100 men.
Mhm. Yeah, if I remember correctly, there are 3 occasions in the Gospels or Gospels and Acts where a centurion is mentioned, and all 3 times it's a positive. The other one would be the centurion at the cross who says, surely this is the Son of
Right.
God.
I just want to know the rest of the story, like what happened to this slave, how his faith had to be built up, and the centurion being in the military and how he talked to it. I'd love to know more.
Maybe you can write it.
And John the Baptist never criticized him. He just said to be honest and don't take any bribes.
Yeah.
And, you could be in the military and serve
Mhm.
God and give your whole heart to him.
Mhm.
You don't have to follow the crowd.
Yeah, there were periods of time, well, especially right after Christ, as the church was first starting, that there were many Christians in the Roman military. Something to remember on this Memorial Day weekend. All right. We're going to find ourselves in the middle of another event here. We have 15 minutes left, and so we're going to get started on the next section. And that one is concerning the kingly rule of God is here. Verses 11 through 17. I have entitled it, "The Rain in Nain Comes Plainly to the Main." If you know the story at all, you'll get it. If not, come back to it later. Verse 11. Soon afterwards, he went to a city called Nain. The word Nain means pleasant. The rabbis considered this an appropriate name for the area of the tribe of Issachar, which was described of Issachar that he saw the land, that it was pleasant. And so there's a city named Pleasant. This is the only time in scripture that the name Nain is mentioned. And there are many who believe they know where it is today, in which case it's about 6 miles southeast of Nazareth and 25 miles southwest of Capernaum. Albert Barnes points out that this city was in Galilee, in the boundaries of the tribe of Issachar, about 2 miles south of Mount Tabor and not far from Capernaum. It lay on the northern slope of the hill of Moreh. You can see, I think you can see it there on the map. That stood at the eastern end of the Jezreel Valley. The hill of Moreh is a significant site because on the south side of Mount Moreh stood Shunem, where Elisha raised the son of the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings chapter 4. And we're going to see some connections with historically what had taken place in that area as we proceed with Jesus arriving there. So Jesus comes, and it says that his disciples were going along with him. Those would be those that had identified themselves as followers of Jesus. And they're also accompanied by a large crowd. I don't know how big is large, but it's bigger than small. So a lot of people, apparently, however you want to define that, were accompanying Jesus as he went along. Now, as we go along here, the contrast should not be missed, namely that Jesus just healed a dying man, and now he's going to restore life to a dead man, upping the ante, if you will. So verse 12. Now, as he approached the gate of the city, I'll stop right there. The word now, at least it says in the New American Standard, it says now. You could translate it but or and. But it's important for us to consider this introductory word to what is occurring. At that time, right at that right moment, these two entourages meet. In order to get to Nain the same day as he left Capernaum, Jesus and his crew would have had to have left in the morning. Since dead bodies were buried soon after expiration, this would mean that if Jesus left Capernaum Jesus would have left Capernaum prior to the death of this man, and then arrived at exactly the time when the body was being carried out to the tomb. He approached the gate of the city, and a dead man, literally one who had died, I guess that's how you define a dead man, right, was being carried out. R.C. Sproul points out there was always a burial procession because by law, Jewish people had to be buried outside the city. And then we see that he was the only son of his mother. The only son. The word used there is monogenes, which is translated elsewhere as only begotten. Same word used in John 3:16. The only begotten. He is the only begotten of his mother, as Jesus is the only begotten of his father. Now, once before, they had carried out a body through the gate, the body of this woman's husband, because it says she was a widow. But then she had one comfort left, her son. Now he was gone. Her support, protector, and provider. So what position did a widow who was childless find herself? Destitute? Dependent on charity? Because for the most part, women could not take up an occupation to provide for herself. Dependent on family and friends, maybe, without any visible means of support. R.C. Sproul says it this way, that she was in an extremely precarious position. Now that day, according to Edersheim, a horn had blown announcing the death of one within the city. In her passionate grief, the mother of the one who had departed this life had torn her outer garment. The body was laid upon the ground where the hair and nails were cut, and the body washed, anointed, and wrapped in the best the widow could procure. Then the mother was left to mourn, sitting on the floor, neither eating food nor drinking wine. If she were to eat some little thing, it must be without prayer in the house of a neighbor or in another room, or at least with her back to the dead body. Religious friends would busy themselves in assisting in the funeral preparations. Since even the poorest Jew was required to provide at least 2 flutes and 1 mourning woman for his departed wife, it's likely that this widow exceeded this for her only son. And this playing of the flutes most likely served not only as a means of providing comfort for the mourner from her closest relatives, but also to announce to people as they're going by that there is a funeral going on, and so they might also sympathize. The mourning procession would have moved from the home in the evening of that very day, heading for and then out of the gate to the nearest to the burial plots outside the city. As it went forth, people in chairs and couches reversed them. They laid low. Outside, the funeral orator, if such was employed, preceded the bier, as it's called, proclaiming the good news of the dead. Immediately before the dead came the women. This being peculiar to Galilee, the Midrash giving the reason is that the women the woman had introduced death into the world, and so they were most closely associated with the dead body. The body was laid in an open coffin or table-like structure made of wicker work, much as you see in the picture here. They did a good job of reenacting that. There was a horn at the foot of this to which the body was fastened. The body was laid face up, which was uncovered with hands folded upon the chest. We may add that when a person had died unmarried or childless, it was customary to put into the coffin something distinctive of them, such as pen and ink or a key. Over the coffins of a bride or bridegroom, something distinct, of a bridegroom, a canopy was carried. The handles of the bier were, is it bier or beer? Bier, I think it is. Is it bier?
Fire.
Bier, yeah. Because beer would be what you drink. The handles of the bier were grasped by relatives or friends to carry it, sort of like the pallbearers we have today, walking without shoes. Now, the reason they walked without shoes is because they didn't want someone's sandal to become unlatched and them having to stop to refasten it and thus disrupt the procession. And so they went without shoes. And they took turns relieving one another of the honor of bearing this burden. During the pauses when they were switching pallbearers, there was loud lamentation. Behind the bier walked the relatives, friends, and then the sympathizing multitude. For it was deemed like mocking one's creator not to follow the dead to his last resting place. And to all such want of reverence, Proverbs 17:5 was applied. One who mocks the poor taunts his maker. One who rejoices at disaster will not go unpunished. If one were absolutely prevented from joining the procession, although for its sake all work, even study, should be interrupted, reverence should at least be shown by rising up before the dead. And they would go on to what the Hebrews beautifully designated as the house of assembly or meeting, the place of rest or of freedom, the field of weepers, the house of eternity or of life. So we can now transport ourselves into that scene. Up from the city close by came this great multitude that followed the dead with lamentations, wild chants of mourning women, accompanied by flutes and the melancholy tinkle of cymbals, perhaps by trumpets, amidst expressions of general sympathy. Along the road from Endor streamed the great multitude which followed the Prince of Life. Here they meet, life and death. The connecting link between them was the deep sorrow of the widowed mother. And we see that a sizable crowd from the city was with her. This showed the real sympathy of the town for her, not for the mother alone, for this showed respect for the one who died, indicating that this was probably no child. Here, two crowds come together. That they should thus meet so abruptly was not casual coincidence. This meeting was brought about by God. Had the Lord arrived at the city gate 30 minutes earlier, the funeral would not have begun. Or had he been 30 minutes later, the funeral would have been over. The two processions were halted, facing each other. Both of these convoys were advancing to the natural course of natural events, as Edersheim puts it, but their concurrence was designed and directly God caused. In this God caused, designed concurrence of events, in themselves ordinary and natural, lies the mystery of special providences, which to whomsoever they happen, he may and should regard them as miracles in answer to prayer. And this principle extends much further to the prayer for a provision of daily bread, to almost anything, to those who have ears to hear. All things around speak in parables of the kingdom of heaven. And maybe you have, I'm sure most of you have experienced these, what we call divine appointments, where you happen to be at some place at the same time as somebody else is, and there's a meeting there that seems God ordained. And that is the occasion upon which the crowd of the funeral comes out of the city and meets the crowd following Jesus coming to the city. And next week, we'll examine what occurred as these two crowds meet. Any comments or questions? John?
There's one that said about the woman with his blood and the fact that she touched the road that she was healed. Okay, and that word healed is the exact same word that's used with servant. It took me a little while to look it up and make sure it was all right, but the word is hugad in there, which is nothing more than, it means much more than just being healed. It means to be made whole, both spiritually, physically, and mentally. So there was more that took place with that servant, even though Christ didn't touch him, than just the healing and not being sick anymore.
Yeah.
It really gives a little picture almost of salvation and a completeness in Christ.
Yeah, maybe even a better word than heal will be restored, at least to the former health,
The
if
word
not
usually
more.
Translated whole in James,
Yeah.
which is a real accurate translation.
Yeah.
It's made whole.
Made whole, yeah. Any others? All right, we'll continue next week with the rain in Nain comes plainly to the main.
I got the Bible downloaded.